Father Antonio had always believed in the absolute clarity of good and evil. For decades, he preached from the pulpit, his sermons filled with unwavering certainty. Light was good, darkness was evil, and there was no middle ground. Yet behind the doors of the old parish, in the quiet moments before dawn, a gnawing doubt began to creep into his mind, a whisper he could not silence. It started subtly, with the faces of parishioners he could not help. The mother who begged him to save her son from addiction, the old man who had sinned but loved deeply, the child whose innocence hid unspeakable cruelty. Antonio realized that the world was not divided into black and white. There were shades of gray, shadows of intention, layers of truth that no scripture had ever revealed to him. One stormy night, while walking through the cemetery behind the church, Antonio encountered a figure he could not explain. Cloaked in shadows, it spoke not with words, but with visions. He saw the faces of people he had judged harshly, their lives filled with choices he had misunderstood. He saw himself, the ex-priest, trapped in a moral rigidity that blinded him. The figure showed him a truth both terrifying and liberating. Good and evil were not absolutes, they were forces that flowed through intention, consequence, and understanding. Haunted by this revelation, Antonio left the church. The decision was agonizing. The life he had known, the faith he had devoted himself to, crumbled like dust. But in the chaos, he discovered freedom. He traveled to villages, cities, and remote mountains, listening to stories of humanity in its rawest form. He encountered thieves who saved lives, priests who caused pain, ordinary people who performed acts of divine compassion without even knowing it. Every encounter deepened his understanding. The universe did not label actions as purely good or evil. Their meaning depended on context, on awareness, on the heart behind them. Antonio began writing. His journals were filled with confessions, reflections, and truths too complex for sermons. He wrote about mercy in unexpected places, evil hiding behind holy masks, and the eternal struggle within every human soul. He realized that what the world called sin or virtue was merely a reflection of perspective. And yet in this chaos, he found purpose, not in imposing judgment, but in witnessing truth. Years passed. Antonio became known as a wanderer, a sage who spoke of the fluidity of morality. People sought him not to be told what was right or wrong, but to understand their own hearts. And in the quiet moments, when he looked at the world without expectation, he felt a profound peace. He had discovered the ultimate paradox. In recognizing the complexity of good and evil, he had found a higher good, the humility to see beyond judgment, the courage to face truth, and the love that existed in every act, no matter how dark or bright it seemed. Antonio never returned to the pulpit. Instead, he built small fires wherever he went, gathering those willing to see the world not in black and white, but in the infinite colors of humanity. And for the first time in his life, he understood the secret that had eluded him for decades. The battle between good and evil was not outside, it was within, and only those brave enough to confront themselves could ever hope to touch the divine. As Antonio wandered through villages and cities, he began to notice patterns in human behavior that defied simple moral judgment. A man who had stolen to feed his starving family was praised in secret by neighbors for his courage, while a wealthy benefactor, outwardly generous, caused suffering through subtle manipulation. Antonio realized that morality was a living thing, not a rigid law, and that judging others without understanding the depths of their lives was a kind of blindness he had once embodied. One evening, in a small mountain town shrouded in fog, Antonio met a young woman named Elena. She had been betrayed by her community for speaking truths they could not face. Her pain was raw, yet in her eyes, Antonio saw a spark of resilience and compassion. She challenged him, asking, "If good and evil are not fixed, how do we choose what to do?" Antonio had no immediate answer. But over time, through countless conversations with her and others, he realized that choosing good was not about following rules. It was about awareness, empathy, and courage. In the months that followed, Antonio began helping people confront their own shadows. He guided the remorseful to make amends, encouraged the broken to find strength in vulnerability, and showed the arrogant that humility could be a form of liberation. Word of the ex-priest who understood the complexity of life spread quietly, and people came from far and wide seeking guidance, not from a preacher of absolutes, but from someone who had seen the raw, unfiltered truth of human hearts. One night, as Antonio sat alone under a sky filled with stars, he reflected on the journey that had begun in doubt and fear. He thought of the figure in the cemetery, the visions that had shattered his certainty, and the endless stories of people who had reshaped his understanding. He realized that the universe itself was neither good nor evil. It simply was a reflection of the choices and intentions of living beings. In this acceptance, Antonio felt a serenity deeper than any he had known in the church. And yet, he knew his work was never done. Every human encounter, every story of love or cruelty, was a lesson, a mirror, a chance to understand the balance of life. Antonio continued walking the earth, not as a priest, not as a judge, but as a witness to the infinite complexities of morality, carrying with him a singular truth. The real battle between good and evil was not fought with fire and brimstone, nor with decrees and sermons. It was fought quietly in the human heart, every day, in every choice. In the end, Antonio discovered something profound, that the ultimate truth about good and evil is not to conquer it, but to understand it, to embrace its paradox, and to live with the courage to act with conscience and compassion, even in a world that refuses to be simple. And with that knowledge, he finally understood the freedom he had sought his entire life, not outside, not in divine judgment, but within the delicate, complex, and unending terrain of the human soul. As Antonio traveled further, he began to encounter forces that tested his newfound understanding. In one town, a powerful cult had taken root, preaching rigid dualities of good and evil, condemning anyone who questioned their doctrine. People lived in fear, believing that a single misstep could damn their souls. Antonio entered the town quietly, observing the fear in their eyes and the cruelty in the hands of the self-righteous. He knew that true evil was not always dramatic. It could hide behind devotion, masked as faith. One night, the cult's leader summoned Antonio. The man's eyes burned with fanaticism, convinced that Antonio's doubts threatened the order he had built. "Do you not fear God?" he demanded. Antonio looked back calmly, seeing the desperation behind the anger. "I fear nothing except the blindness that calls itself truth," he replied. This simple statement ignited whispers through the town. People began to question what they had been taught, seeing for the first time that morality was more than obedience. It was understanding, empathy, and awareness. Antonio spent months in that town, guiding its people quietly. He helped them reconcile with the truths they had been taught to ignore. Slowly, fear gave way to reflection, and reflection gave way to choice. People began to act with responsibility, not out of punishment or reward, but out of genuine understanding. Antonio realized that the most profound work of life was not saving souls in the traditional sense, but awakening hearts to the truth they already carried within them. Through all of this, Antonio faced moments of doubt and loneliness. He missed the certainty of his former life, the comfort of clear definitions of right and wrong. But he also recognized that his old certainty had been a cage. Freedom, he understood now, came not from knowing the rules, but from embracing the unknown, from navigating the moral labyrinth with courage and honesty. In time, Antonio's reputation grew. Travelers, scholars, mystics, and the curious sought him out. Some came to challenge him, others to learn, but all left transformed, carrying the seeds of questioning, reflection, and compassion. And yet, Antonio remained humble, understanding that no one person could hold the answers. Only the willingness to see clearly and act wisely could guide humanity through the tangled threads of good and evil. And so Antonio continued walking, a solitary figure against the vast backdrop of the world, carrying the truth he had discovered, that good and evil are not absolutes imposed from above, but living, shifting forces within every heart. To understand them, one must look deeply, act with conscience, and embrace the paradox of life itself. Only then could a soul touch the divine, not through judgment or dogma, but through awareness, courage, and love. And in this journey, Antonio found a peace deeper than any ritual, sermon, or prayer could offer. A peace born of seeing the world as it truly is, a mirror of the choices, intentions, and hearts of all living beings, where light and darkness are never fixed, but always intertwined, and where the greatest truth lies in the wisdom to navigate both with compassion. As Antonio wandered farther from the towns he had helped, he began to sense that the universe itself was testing him. Strange events occurred wherever he went, storms that seemed almost sentient, animals appearing to guide or warn him, whispers in the wind that carried fragments of ancient wisdom. He realized that understanding good and evil was no longer enough. He needed to confront the forces within himself that reflected the very darkness he sought to understand. One night, Antonio entered a forgotten monastery, abandoned for decades. Inside, he found a hidden library filled with ancient texts and forbidden scrolls, written by monks who had explored the boundaries between light and shadow. As he read, he discovered knowledge that challenged everything he had once believed, stories of saints who committed grave sins yet achieved enlightenment, tyrants whose cruelty birthed unintended good, and rituals meant to confront one's own inner darkness. It was a revelation that shook him to the core. Driven by curiosity and a sense of destiny, Antonio began to perform a ritual the texts described, a meditation that forced him to face his deepest fears, regrets, and hidden desires. In the darkness of the monastery, visions came, faces of people he had judged, moments he had acted with pride, failures he had buried. He felt the weight of every choice he had ever made, the subtle influence of his own ego, and the unexpected good that had sprung from his mistakes. For the first time, he understood the complexity of human morality, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing force that existed in every action, thought, and intention. Emerging from the ritual, Antonio felt transformed. He no longer feared darkness, for he understood that it was not the enemy, but a necessary counterpart to light. Every soul carried both, and the true challenge was to act consciously, to choose compassion over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and courage over fear. Word of Antonio's journey began to spread in whispers across lands far and wide. People sought him not for absolution or sermons, but for guidance through their own inner battles. He taught them that true enlightenment was not about following rules, but about seeing clearly, acting wisely, and embracing the complexity of life. Slowly, communities began to change, not through doctrine, but through awakened hearts willing to confront both their light and their shadow. And in the quiet moments, under the endless sky, or in the stillness of a forest, Antonio reflected on the path he had walked. He had left certainty behind, but in doing so, he had found a truth far deeper, that the divine is not an external judge, but the awareness within each heart that chooses good even when darkness surrounds it, that loves even when hatred rises, and that seeks understanding even when chaos reigns. Antonio continued his journey, a solitary witness to the human soul. And in every encounter, he saw the eternal struggle of good and evil, not as a war to be won, but as a dance to be understood. Each choice, each act of courage or kindness, each moment of self-reflection became a testament to the power of awareness. And in this realization, Antonio finally knew that the greatest truth was not a revelation to preach, but a way of living, to navigate the world with eyes open, heart aware, and spirit free.